Welcome back to Nightmares Unleashed, produced by Ted Heavner and Delaney Sutton. This is episode 7, Not for Scrapping. This episode contains depictions of death, dismemberment, self-harm, and gore. And now, enjoy the nightmare.
No, come on. Right, there. Right. Right. Hello, Casey. It's me, your granddad. You asked me to tell you a story about the worst thing I've ever seen, and with my recent diagnosis, I thought it best to record it for you while I have the chance. I do know you're not as much of a railway nut as I am, or was, I suppose, so I'll try to explain any terms and expressions I may use. Right, so, let's begin with some context. As you know, I was with the railways since I was 14. I joined up at my local shed in Manchester as a cleaner, and gradually worked my way up to a driver. Those were the glory days, back in the 50s with the war behind us. Just me and my fireman, and later your granddad, Tim Harris, rushing through the countryside on our engines, pulling anything and everything, everywhere. I drove all sorts of trains, be it express workings to London and back, or empty mineral stock down to the collieries. No matter what I pulled, really, the engines were always the interesting part of it for me. I know you've seen some steam locomotives, Casey, on those lovely little heritage railways we went to, but that's nothing compared to my day. You should have seen it. 17 to 20 engines lined up in a shed, all being worked on and fussed around, all slowly coming to life. You might think that a funny term of phrase, that steam engines coming to life. It might just be that to some people, not to me. No, they were never just machines to me, nor to any of the other engine crews either. All of us knew it. These weren't just pieces of metal, they breathed. They were great big beasts made of steel and fire and smoke. Firing one up from cold, you could see it clear as day. They were all different, even those of the same class or type. That was only really felt by us drivers and firemen. The passengers never got to know that 44762 was always a bit too eager to go fast, or that 41708 bucked and bounced way more than its fellow shunting engines. She nearly threw me off the footplate once. That's where the crew would stand in the cab, if you're wondering. The 60s were tough for us all. British Railways had decided to do away with steam altogether. They'd replace them all with diesel locos, they said. I didn't really believe them. I just went about my work not worrying about it for a while. You know, I did have a few favourites. 47284 was one of them. Little tank engine with the 6 wheels, like that Thomas book, but not exactly. I used to shunt trains. That means arranging trains. Yeah, I used to shunt trains with her all through the station yard. Lovely engine she was. We called her class Ginties. Never gave me any trouble. Always had enough steam for us. Still remember the day they came to take her away. Tim and I had just gone on shed to get our engine ready. We hadn't been put on 47284 in a while. I didn't have to wonder why for very long. For as I came walking up to the engines waiting to warm up, I saw one of them newfangled diesel shunters waltz up and buffer up to our little Ginty.
What in blazes? Hey, mate. What do you think you're doing with our engine?
Sorry, mate. Not your engine anymore.
What do you mean, not our engine anymore?
Harry, calm down. What's going on?
This here engine's been withdrawn.
Withdrawn?
What? You can't do that. She's still useful.
Can sure don't think so. They said it was being replaced by one of these.
He slapped his diesel with a smile on his face, as if he was proud of it.
The steamer's off to the scrapper.
But you can't. She...
But there was nothing either of us could do. That blasted diesel started and dragged our engine away with it. Thinking back, it's the strangest thing. The noises 47284 made as she was dragged away, they sounded... In hindsight, they sounded like pleas for help. Help I could not give. Not then, not later. That's how it went for the rest of them. Almost all our steam engines were dragged off exactly like that, one after the other. In their place, the shed got fancy new diesels for us to work on. Horrid things, if you don't mind me saying so. Never liked them, I have. Rubbish to look at, even more rubbish to drive. There was never any excitement while driving a diesel. And most of the time you drove alone, so Tim wasn't with me quite as much anymore. And worst of all, they never felt alive. Not unlike the old ladies once did. You know, I did often wonder if we could save one of them. Unfortunately, that was out of the question, for our sheds anyway. Mostly because Hyde and Sons was so close by. Hyde and Sons was the scrapyard nearest to our sheds, maybe a mile out. They specialised in breaking up railway equipment, and let's just say they greatly enjoyed the influx of work they were getting. Mr. Gerald Hyde ran the place and employed his 3 sons, Oscar, Carris and Trevor, as well as a gaggle of other workers to cut up whatever needed scrapping. I'd been there a couple of times before, just dropping off wagons filled with scrap. Never really got a good look at the place. I never really needed to, I suppose. Not until that week. That damn week I decided to see if I could do something to help the old steamers. Lucky me then, I had one day I got assigned a diesel shunter and was given a number of tasks to do around the shed and the surrounding area. Again, did not like the diesel, but D3507 had proven useful enough. One of those tasks, of course, was running a train of scrap to the Hyde and Sons yard and bringing back empty wagons. I strategically arranged that job to be the last of the day, so my engine would be low on fuel as I got there. I got there as the sun was getting lower in the early October sky, colouring it light orange. I stopped the train on the allotted line, and as I stepped out to uncouple from the trucks, saw one of the Hyde brothers, Carris, I think, come walking up to me.
Hello.
Hiyo, you're one of those steam drivers, aren't you? Gerald, right?
Harry is fine.
Of course. Well, what do you think of our handiwork?
I looked around but couldn't see much. Near the front gate there were only rusted hulks of coaches and wagons, bits having been removed from them here and there. It was time to put my little plan into action.
I'm low on fuel. You got a pump somewhere?
Of course. Follow me.
I clambered back into the cab and drove the diesel to where Carris was walking. He led me into a side and out the way where a small new diesel pump had been installed. I jumped out while Carris readied the pump. He handed me the nozzle, but I pushed it back to him.
I need a smoke. I can trust you with this, yeah?
Yeah, sure. No problem.
I wasn't going to smoke, of course. I quickly got out of his sight, hiding behind the rows of coaches, sat solemnly rusting away, and slipped out into the rest of the yard. It was somehow exactly what I was expecting, and yet still it stung me so much I almost lost my breath. They were all there. Every engine taken from our shed. The little 4-wheeled pug stood at the front, her paint fading with streaks of rust working their way down her relatively large saddle tank. The 2 big mixed traffic engines sat opposite her, one having only its frames left. One of our black 5s had its boiler cladding, the painted steel wrapper around the boiler torn off crudely, exposing the copper-coloured boiler underneath. Our 4F was in the worst state of all. The front half of her boiler had been completely stripped away, but the boiler tubes, the tubes that allow heat to travel through the boiler, heating the water, still remained. They stuck out of the half boiler like branches of a tree, jutting in all directions. Looking closely, they were white with limescale deposits.
Probably not worth salvaging.
I said to myself. I found 47284 at the very back. They seemingly hadn't touched her yet. While that relieved me, I couldn't get my head around the amount of engines there I either hadn't seen before or had rarely interacted with. The most impressive display was one of those engines, sitting in the middle of the yard. I had to hold in a gasp as I approached. They had caught a duchess. Bit of background. They were officially called the Princess Coronation class, but us engine men called them the Duchesses. They were the premier express passenger locomotives of the London, Midland and Scottish Railway, and were still widely used during the days of British Railways. But in hindsight, at that point I hadn't seen a Duchess in a long time. Her presence at Hyde and Sons explained it, I suppose. She was 46225, Duchess of Gloucester, and she was a sad sight indeed. How to explain this? Do you know that in Thomas and the Tank Engine show, where the faces are on the engines? On real locomotives, there sits the smokebox door. The door to, well, the smokebox. The part at the front of the boiler with the chimney on it. Ash collects in there, so you need a door to open it up and shovel it out. I'm rambling, sorry. Point is, Duchess of Gloucester didn't have her door anymore, nor did she have her boiler tubes. It seemed like they were in better shape than those on the 4F. I saw the other two Hyde brothers and some others stood around her. Oscar, the eldest, stood to her left, cutting off her left-hand buffer with some sort of gas axe that scrap men used to cut into metal. I was too late to save it. It dropped to the floor with a clang as I ran up.
There you go, another buffer for the pile. Oi, Trevor. File that away, will you?
Okay, Oscar. Right away, Oscar.
The other brother, Trevor, lobbed the buffer on a set of piles I hadn't seen yet. Engine parts were sorted by type in these big piles, either on the floor or in wagons. Buffers, cylinders, connecting rods, number plates. It made me sick to see my beloved engines reduced to nothing but parts. I must have stared at that pile for longer than I thought, for I snapped out of my trance when Oscar spoke up.
Hey, you there. You're one of the BR boys, aren't you?
Huh? Oh, yes. Why?
Come to see your steamers die?
Well, no, I'm...
Such a shame. Such beautiful machines reduced to mere metal. Aye, such a shame. A shame that I don't care.
More money for us, that's what I care about. Fancy caring about some old hunks of junk.
Of course I care. These were my whole life.
I went up and touched the Duchess's remaining buffer. Oscar leapt down to our level.
These machines, so full of life and spirit. They shouldn't be discarded like this. They should be preserved, put in a museum, or bought by private...
Oh, no, right. Oh, can you believe this guy?
Well, excuse me for...
Listen here, mister, these machines are ours now. Got it? They are here to be cut up, end of story. Nobody's gonna save them. Nobody here cares. And I don't care if you feel like they have a life in them or whatever you nutjob engine drivers say. They're bloody trains, mate. They ain't got feelings.
Yeah, and you shouldn't even be here. Get lost, man.
Trevor got right up in my face, allowing me to see a large scar along the side of his neck before he pushed me back. I nearly fell over the cut-off buffer.
Yeah,
That's right.
go on,
Get
go
him,
on, fuck
fucking
up.
in him.
I was about to give him a good old knuckle sandwich before I heard heavy footfall and saw a man in a brown suit walking up.
Lads, please, no fights on sight. Leave the poor man alone.
No.
With a look of disdain, all five did so. The man, who I assumed was Gerald Hyde himself, walked up to me and thrust out his hand. I shook it, well, really only out of formality.
Mr. Harold Williams. Can I call you Harry?
Mr. Williams is fine.
Right. Do excuse the lads and lasses, not used to strangers. I saw you had a good look at our recent acquisitions.
Yes, most were engines I used to drive.
Ah, yes, I am sorry. Oh well, the wheels of progress must keep turning and all that.
Isn't there something we can do? Save at least one. That Ginty back there is virtually complete. I'm sure I could...
No. Absolutely not. Not when there's profits to be made.
But...
I think your engine's ready.
I left that place angry and deeply saddened. That night, I had a very strange dream. I dreamt that I was on the scrapyard again, standing on the rails. Rusty engines stood either side of me, and in front of me stood the Duchess, missing a smokebox door and left buffer. I looked down to see the cutting torch. The same gas axe used to cut through engines. It sat, flame ablaze in my left hand, and I felt the strangest urge. I wanted to, needed to remove any useful parts. Slowly and deliberately I moved the gas axe to my right hand, outstretched and waiting, and I began to cut. I felt the hottest pain I've ever imagined as the flame of the torch burned through my flesh and bone, and yet I still dreamed. Still I stood there, the Duchess of Gloucester watching me as I cut off my hand. And then I woke up in a cold sweat. I talked to Tim about it the next morning.
Good grief, Harry, you have some imagination.
Not the point. Those poor engines, can't anything be done?
Well, Mr. Hyde certainly won't do anything about it, and neither will British Rail, but nobody says you can't do something about it.
What are you suggesting?
Tim gave me a wink and a sly smile. I knew exactly what he meant. And so, that night, I grabbed a lantern and stealthily walked over to the scrapyard. It wasn't a bad walk, actually. Lovely scenery, even if it was dark. Nothing much happened until I crested the final hill. There, in the valley, was Hyde and Sons. And just as I was getting ready to sneak again, the whistle sounded. It was a low-pitched, loud whistle. It blew long and hard. I knew it almost immediately.
That's a Duchess's whistle.
And almost as if on cue, the screaming started. I raced down that hill as fast as I could. As I reached the fence near the main gate, smoke started to rise from inside the perimeter. I hopped the fence, and just as I landed, I saw a diesel Shunter be shoved back into the buffers by the pug.
Oh shit!
It lurched and tipped over. I quickly dropped my lantern and hid behind an old car. I took a look inside the cab of the pug, but to my amazement, there wasn't anyone in there. Somehow she had moved of her own accord. Looking back at her, I saw graffiti I hadn't noticed before on her tanks. In bold white letters it said, "Not for scrapping." I ran into the yard to see what was happening, but... oh God, Casey, what I saw... I saw... the piles of parts. They'd been replaced. No longer were there wagons filled with engine parts. Now what came spilling out the doors on their sides were limbs and torsos and feet and hands and heads and eyes, all neatly arranged and sorted, blood covering every surface. On the pile of heads I saw that of Carris. I held in the urge to vomit as I moved further. I continued making my way to the back of the yard, passing past blood-stained coaches and trucks filled with tongues. I saw the Black 5. It replaced its lost boiler cladding with what looked like human skin. Skin with a very distinctive scar running along it.
Please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to.
I heard a voice coming from beside me, but as I looked, all I saw was the closed smokebox door of a standard Class 4 with blood gushing out from underneath it, on top of freshly severed legs. I ran, then ran until I saw Oscar Hyde crawling on the ground in front of the 4F. As I watched, I saw the wild bouquet of boiler tubes curl and stretch like tentacles. They wrapped around Oscar and lifted him into the air. Then, as they brought him closer to the cab, I heard its firebox open, and the flames that erupted from that cab, they looked like hell itself were nestled inside that engine. I ran away, not looking at poor Oscar's fate, but I heard it. I held my ears, but I still heard him roast to death. I lost my way at that point. I just ran blindly, the rows of wagons and coaches seeming to go on forever, until I came into a clearing where I saw Mr. Hyde, slumped against the Duchess of Gloucester. Time seemed to stand still for me as I saw what had happened to him. He was leaning upright on the Duchess's one remaining buffer. He couldn't stand, of course. You need feet for that, and your left leg. There lay in front of him, charred almost beyond recognition. In his left hand, he held the lit cutting torch, and in his right hand lay smouldering beside him. He had this manic, toothy grin on his face.
but his eyes held nothing but pain.
What are you doing?
I'm removing any useful parts.
Why? Why are you doing this?
Well, because she certainly can't do it. She doesn't have any hands.
He looked at the Duchess with that expression of joy, yet terror. And then, before I could do anything, his left hand moved up and the gas axe burned cleanly through his neck. And then there was silence. Everything stopped. And I couldn't shake the feeling that even though they didn't have eyes, all their eyes were on me. I looked at all of them, at engines I knew, engines I had loved, and I broke. I slumped to my knees and I wept.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I can't save you. I wanted to, I was going to try, but after this, I just can't. I'm sorry, please don't hurt me.
And then, the Duchess moved. Somehow there were points back there and Duchess of Gloucester moved gracefully into the space I swear wasn't there before, leaving me a clear path to the rear fence. Well, almost clear. For standing before me now was 47284. I stood up and I walked over to her.
I'm sorry, Olga.
47284 then began rolling backwards as well, gaining speed until she hit the one wagon behind her and stopped. The wagon careened into the fence, creating a large enough hole for me to escape through. At this point, most would have sprinted out of there, but I stayed a minute, looking at my old friends.
Thank you.
A collection of hisses and wheeshes came as their reply. At that point, I walked out of the scrapyard, and when I was sure I was out of their sight, I sprinted up the hill. As I was climbing, I dared to look back. When I did, began the biggest chorus of whistles I've ever heard. They were a harmony of painful melodies singing out in loss and mourning. For I think they knew as well as I that, despite all that happened that day, they couldn't be saved. I continued running and I never went back there again. BR covered it up in the end. Said it was an industrial accident. They had contractors scrap everything on site within a week and sold the land to become a housing estate, I believe. I tried to continue. But after BR banned steam altogether in '68, I left. I hopped between industrial railways, any that still ran steam. Tim, on the other hand, quit sooner than I did, and decided to climb the ladder at a law firm. This meant that by the time we moved in together and my services weren't needed anywhere anymore, it didn't exactly matter that I was unable to contribute to the household. Tim always thought it better that way, of course. You know what they say, a driver's wife is a widow for most of the time. Never thought I'd be the widower. But, oh well. I'll see him again soon enough. I'm glad I filmed this. You know, it's nice to know these endings will be remembered, like how I will be after I go. The, murder notwithstanding. I hope this satisfies your curiosity. I think I'll try and, turn it off.
Hi, Grumps. Just wanted to ask you if... Oh! What are you doing?
Oh, hello, sweetheart. I was just turning off the camera.
Oh, don't strain yourself. Sit back down, please. I'll get it.
Alright.
Grandad?
Yes?
You, do know you left the lens cap on, right?
Oh.
Oh, blimey.
This episode of Nightmares Unleashed was produced by Delaney, Sutton and Ted Heavner. It was written and directed by Janet G. It featured the voices of Kit Paterson as old Gerald Williams, Clark Schultz as young Gerald Williams, Lumi Oakes as Casey Williams, Brady Anderson as Dim Harris, Collin Longo as the diesel Shunter driver, Ted Heavner as Gerald Hyde, Elliot Browne as Oscar Hyde, Emma Nicolaou as Carris Hyde, Matt Duarte as Trevor Hyde, Jenny Wang as the female scrubber, and Janet G as Scrubbers 1 and 2. It was edited by Ted Heavner, with original music by Autumn Zimmerman, transcript by Luni Fox and cover art by Janet G. Thanks for listening.